Amen. As I said, the story that we're going to be thinking about this morning is a really weird story. Sometimes we read stories in the Bible, and even if they're weird, we sort of calm them down somehow in our minds so that we don't see the full weirdness of the story. Today's story is a weird story. It's a story of someone meeting Jesus and the difference that meeting Jesus made to that person. And as we go through the story, if you haven't guessed what it is yet, I'm not going to tell you just yet. As we go through the story, one of the things that always amazes me is that for first century Jewish people, this story is just cram-packed full of unclean things. You may guess the story from some of the things I tell you. The whole story happens in a Gentile area. For Jewish people, an unclean area. The region of the Gerasenes, the region of the Decapolis. The story happens, as the title may have already given away to you, in a graveyard. It happens amongst tombs full of dead bodies. For Jewish people, an incredibly unclean place, having no contact with dead bodies in any way. It's a story that's full of evil, unclean spirits. It's a story, remember, for Jewish people, that's full of pigs. The most unclean animal that there was for Jewish people. And not just pigs, but demonic pigs. It's got a character who we discover, sort of, is called Legion. It's someone who is possessed, someone who is mad, someone who therefore by Jewish first century thoughts is unclean, has been rejected by God. And the fact that he's called Legion, we'll think about this a little bit, also would do nothing for a first century Jewish mind as well, except connect him with the invading Roman army, which was full of legions. And we'll think more about that as well. Being perfectly honest with you this morning, I've got absolutely no problem with the weird bits of the story. Although I don't think that's what God wants to speak to us about this morning. But I have no problem with these weird bits. There's been quite a few times, even since I've been here in Taunton, and it happened previous to that in other places as well. Quite a few times where I've been asked to visit people's houses because of the weird things that were happening in the people's houses. The first time it happened, when I came to, since I've been in Taunton, since I've been here, I thought, well, who can I take with me? Because I want to take someone with me to visit this house where this lady is saying that strange things are happening in her house. And so she's not here this morning. We haven't seen her around for a little while because of COVID and stuff. Hopefully she'll see this at some point on the video. I said to Dorothy, would you mind coming with me? Those of you who know Dorothy will know what she's like. She's quite a level-headed person. She's a retired maths teacher. She thinks logically. And so, just before we went into the house, we sat in my car and I explained to her what we were about to do. And I explained to her some of the things that we might see happen. And I said, maybe not, but you need to be prepared and ready for something that might happen, something strange, something weird, something odd going on. I have never seen a more terrified look in somebody's eyes than at that moment. And she turned to me and she said words that I'm sure she's never ever thought she would use in her life. She turned to me and said, "Are we ghost busting?" And I said, well, sort of, yeah. And so, as in every situation that's happened, and Dorothy's now been with me quite a few times to these kinds of situations, we sat and we talked to the people in the house. We prayed for them. We prayed for the house. And every single time that we've done that, things have stopped. And when I've gone back to them and said, what's happening? They say, nothing. Nothing's happening anymore. There are times where we've been in places, Dorothy and I, and we've stood, and we have sensed a change in the place. Even the brightness of the place has somehow changed, the light within it. We prayed with someone, and I can't explain it to you very well. All I can say is that their face physically changed as we prayed with them. So I have no problem with the weird bits of this story. But as I read through the story this week, and as I was preparing for this morning, there was one overriding thing that I felt God was saying to me, and it's a challenge to each one of us and to me this morning. And it comes in one of the really, really simple bits. There's nothing to do with the weirdness. But I just wanted you to recognise that the weirdness is weird, but it's not really. Let's read the story, and then we'll get to sing a song in a second. So let's see if the clicker is working okay. If you've got a Bible and want to turn to it, please do. It'll be coming up on the screen if you'd rather read it there. We're in Mark chapter 5, and we're going to go from verses 1 to 20. If you haven't guessed what the story is yet, you'll see what it is now, and see about some of the weirdness within it. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demon begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. We're going to watch the video. It's a video of the story that I just read to you. But as I said earlier, when sometimes we read Bible stories, somehow in our minds they get sort of watered down. We lose the shock and the surprise. And this is a video that I found that tells the story of Legion and of his encounter with Jesus. It's quite a new one. It was only a couple of years, less than 2 years ago, that it was produced. And you'll see it's a very particular style of cartoon. But if you're shocked by it, please be shocked by it, because that's the point. Okay? already acknowledged that on face value, that's a weird story. And it's been something that over the centuries, people in my kind of position have had to try and deal with. What does it mean? What's it about? There's a literalness to it. It's a story that happened. It's something Jesus did. But along with that, people have always tried to come up with things to do with what does it mean and what's it saying and what's going on. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas both agreed that all the point of that story was that we would now be able to do what we like with animals and treat them how we wanted to. A man called René Girard, he said, those of you who have been around for a little while and through lockdown, do you remember the video of the sermon that I did where we talked about the scapegoat? You remember that one? Where the priest would put his hand on the head of the scapegoat and then he put the red wool on the top and it was taken out into the desert. He says, René Girard, that actually this was just a retelling of the scapegoat story. And when you see some of the things that happen in this story and happen to the scapegoat, you can see the connection that's going on. Being cast out of the camp, being tied up, being stoned, having the transfers of sins being put onto animals, the death by being thrown off a cliff, all those kinds of things. There's all kinds of connections in there. Others have said that actually it's just a joke. It's an anti-Roman political joke. It happens in the region of the Gerasenes, which is under Roman control. And the Romans always stationed a legion of their soldiers there. They always had a legion stationed in that region. So just like the man, the region was invaded by the legion. A legion, we know, is a Roman unit. It's about 5,000 men that would have been in a legion. The Romans, all the time that they were in that area, and in Israel and Palestine, they would mock the Jews because, the Jews don't eat pork. And so the Romans would mock them because of that and call them all kinds of names. And so to get their own back, and I looked this up in lots of sources to double check and it's true, to get their own back, the Jews referred to the Romans as pigs. Like what name might we call the French? And what do the French call us, do you know? Le roast beef, because we eat roast beef. And so, Romans, and especially Roman soldiers, by the people of that area were called pigs. The Romans arrived in their galleons by sea and invaded the land. The sea for the people of that area was regarded as a place where the monsters come from. And so in this story, if this is the way we wanted to look at it, this anti-Roman political joke, Jesus is shown as standing against and having authority over the Romans by casting the invading legion back into the pigs and then into the sea from where they'd come from. Whether it's literal, whether it's a parable, whether it's a shadowing of other biblical concepts, whether it's a political joke, what happens at the end of the story is the same. And what happens at the end of the story is the thing I think that God wants to speak to us about this morning. The man is healed of a whole legion of problems. And what's his reaction? He wants to follow Jesus. He wants to be with Jesus. He wants to go where Jesus goes. He wants to live the experience of being with Jesus. He wants to follow Jesus as Jesus does all of these miracles and healings and teaching. He wants to sit and listen and see what Jesus is doing. But when he says to Jesus, I'll come and I'll follow you. I'll sit and I'll learn from you. I'll sit and I'll watch and I'll see all that you're doing. Jesus has an interesting response. He says, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, his home area, how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. You see what happens? He becomes the first missionary to the Gentile world. Instead of having his life changed by Jesus so that he can just keep following Jesus, just sitting and watching Jesus do all the miracles and the healings and the teaching. Instead of that, Jesus turns this man into a storyteller. A storyteller who will help heal the world. He doesn't have to teach theology. He doesn't have to preach to big crowds. He just has to tell the people around him his story. The story of what Jesus had done for him, how his life had been changed. Nothing preachy, nothing theological and difficult. Just tell his story. And I think that's what Jesus asks us to do today. You may have a special calling to do some of the theology, to do some of the preachy stuff, but for all of us, then I think all that Jesus expects us to do is to tell our story. I got a letter this week from, I've written it down so I get it exactly right, the Director of the Board of Education for the Bath and Wells Diocese of the Church of England. Say that again? The Director of the Board of Education for the Bath and Wells Diocese of the Church of England. That's Ed, if you didn't know. Yeah. But the letter I got was on official heading paper and everything, signed by Mr. E. Gregory, or something at the bottom. It was my official "you're in" letter to be a foundation governor at the academy. So they have to have 2 foundation governors who represent Christian ethos and Christian values within the governing body, and so I've just been appointed as the second one of those, and I had to have it officially approved by Ed because the academy is a church school. I'm not telling you that for any reason other than on their headed paper, when I looked at it, I hadn't noticed it before, and I went, ooh. Because on their headed paper, underneath the logo for the diocese, they've got a strap line. They've got their what they're about line. And it says, living the story, telling the story. And it suddenly jumped out at me. I hadn't really seen it before, in all the times I've seen stuff from the diocese. I think they understand what's going on. We live the story. We become a part of the story. We ask Jesus to be involved in our life, and we enter his story and he enters our story, and we become linked together. And then what's our job? To tell our story. To tell of what Jesus has done for us. To tell of the difference that he's made. How easy is that for us? I'm going to get you in a minute to do something. You didn't know this. I've got it down on my sheet as activity. Because what I want you to do is to spend a minute or two in a second thinking about what Jesus has done in your life. Whether that was first coming to him, whether that was something that's happened more recently, whether that's something from this week that you could share about. I want you to be able to turn to the person next to you and tell your story to them. If you haven't got a story to tell, that's fine. Just say, I haven't got a story to tell. But maybe this morning, Jesus is wanting to come and meet with you, and you become part of his story and him become part of your story, so that if I asked you to do this next week, you'd have a story that you could tell. "13 years ago, I first came to Wellsprings Chapel for an interview. There was an interview panel of about 15 people sat round. Susie came with me to hold my hand so I wouldn't be too scared and to see where everything was and what was happening. And then when she arrived, they said, "Oh, you come in as well." And so she got interviewed too. I did my story. I told my story because that was part of what I had to do. I did some juggling as part of it, because those of you who know me will know that I would do that. And then in the questions, I got a really interesting question. The question I got was, when was the last time God spoke to you? And what did he say? I answered that question because a couple of days before, God had very clearly spoken to me about something. I'm not going to tell you what it was now. I don't even know if I think I told the people in the interview what it was about. In a minute or two, you're going to have the chance to think. And then to tell someone just a tiny bit of your story. Or the other question I would ask is, when was the last time God spoke to you? And what did he say? Because what we're expected to do is when we meet Jesus, he turns us, just like the man in this story, into storytellers who will help to heal the world as we live it and as we tell it. Not necessarily big theology, not necessarily big preachy stuff, not necessarily to hundreds of people, but go home to your own people, your own neighbours, your own area, your own work colleagues, your own whoever it is, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Tell your story to people. I'm going to give us a minute or two of quiet so that we can just have a little think. And then I'm going to encourage you, if you can, to talk to the person next to you or someone near to you. And just for a minute or so, tell them your story. Tell them what God's done for you. The difference that he's made. And it's going to be a lot easier to do that here than it is when you go home to your own people and your own neighbours and your own work colleagues. This is a nice, safe place to do it. Because we're going to encourage each other as we do it. We're going to get excited with each other as we do it, because we're hearing about what God is doing in someone's life. When we meet Jesus, he turns us into a storyteller who will help heal the world as we live it and tell it. Let's have a minute for you to think, for you to respond. And then I'll give you a chance to share with the people around you what story you might want to tell. If you haven't finished, carry on afterwards. If one of you's had a go and not the other one, and you want the other, carry on afterwards. That's fine. For those who finished, great. Well done. Was it too hard? No?
We want to do it in our church now. I just said we want to do it in our church now. It's a good challenge,
Good. Please do. And those watching at home, please try doing that as well. Whether it's with someone at home or whether it's with someone else that you see during the week, whatever. Find a safe place to practice. But then be ready. Because what we're called to do is to be witnesses. We're called to tell people what Jesus has done for us. We're called to go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you.